stretch IRA was extinguished, or is at least no longer around, just a few years ago with the first rendition of the Secure Act. Now we have the second rendition of the Secure Act 2.0. So the question becomes, what should beneficiaries do with their IRA? Now that the stretch IRA is no longer and beneficiaries have to take their money in a short time period, how should folks that own an IRA manage this currently? Because 2 out of 2 people will die. At some point, you got to pass it on. And also, how should new beneficiaries manage this if you recently inherited a non-spousal IRA? That's what we're going to talk about today. My name is Michael MacKelvie. I'm a CFP with Mariner Wealth Advisors. I'm also joined by Valerie Escobar, who is also a CFP with Mariner Wealth Advisors. This is Your Life Simplified. Valerie, how we doing?
Hey, I am great. I am, what's the word? This is a hairy topic. Let's say that. So I am sort of excited to nerd out, but I am a little like, hey, audience, bear with us. This is really important, but this one is, it's hairy.
Yeah, it is. So I guess maybe a good starting place is just explaining what an inherited IRA is, and maybe distinguishing the difference between a spousal IRA so that everybody understands what it is that we're speaking to today.
Right. So when a person dies, there's all sorts of different sorts of things that they can leave behind: houses and cars and investments. And so we're going to focus on the world of investments. And so usually we're going to say qualified and non-qualified. Non-qualified are brokerage accounts, taxable accounts, individual accounts, all those things. But we're talking about qualified, so IRAs, both Roth IRAs and traditional IRAs, but also retirement plans, so 401ks, 403bs, 457s, all of that is really the focus here. And when a person dies, so Mike, pretend that old Mike here died and he had a 401k and an IRA and everything like that. He did not have a spouse, and so he left it to somebody. A nephew, we'll say. When this nephew inherits that money, the qualified money, it needs to go into something. And that something is going to be that inherited IRA.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. So this inherited IRA, and again, so if you're married and you pass away, your spouse gets that IRA. There's not really any big changes that occur there, right?
Right. Yeah.
It would be the next
for the most
passing.
part with this. Yeah. The Secure Act didn't really do any huge changes. Secure Act 2.0 made a couple of changes that, it's very nuanced, but really, if you are a spouse, you can turn your deceased spouse's qualified accounts into your own accounts.
Mm-hmm.
And then it's a little bit of distinguishing when you start the required minimum distribution. It could either be based on that person's age. If they were younger than you, then you can wait a little bit longer. Or if you want to put it into your own, then you'll start with your own. But for the most part, those aren't too changed, and you have lots of options.
Yeah. So the implications, I guess, for the beneficiaries then, if you are inheriting an IRA now, so let's say your parents pass away and you're inheriting this IRA, or you're inheriting an IRA from someone else that isn't your spouse, you have a set period of time, 10 years, that you need to exhaust those funds. You need to take everything out of that IRA. That's the big change here. Whereas before it was referred to as a stretch. You would stretch it over the course of, depending on that person's age, several years. Now you have to do it within a 10-year period of time. So they're really forcing your hand to start taking money out, which forces some changes from a planning standpoint. So let's transition maybe into what you should do then, and maybe look at a few different scenarios. So I guess, if you have an IRA currently, maybe you're retired or you're, nearing retirement, what are some things you maybe would tell your kids, or how would you maybe prepare this before your passing, since chances are that will occur at some point?
Right. Yeah. So there's a very high likelihood you will die. And so planning for that is advisable. Studies show. Yeah, I will stand behind that as a certainty. If you die and you have qualified accounts, this applies to people that are, I guess it applies to everybody, but you can say, if I'm going to leave a bunch of money to my kids, how I leave that money to them will have implications for them. If it is, let's say you have $1 million in a taxable account and you have $1 million in your IRA. The money that's in the taxable account will have as of right now, as current laws, you'll have a step up in cost basis, and so they'll effectively get that all tax free. With the IRA now, assuming that the person that you're leaving it to is not a minor, is not disabled or chronically ill, or not your spouse, if they are out of those categories, then they will be required to take it out within 10 years. And so if let's say that they make a lot of money themselves, and so they're already in a high tax bracket, and then they inherit a $1 million IRA, a $2 million IRA, and they have to take it out over 10 years. Right now, it's not clarified if there is a required yearly distribution amount. They were thinking about requiring that, but for right now, it's just anytime during that 10-year period, you have to take it out. But that also means that you could have a really huge tax year. So one of the things to
Yes.
plan for is saying, you know what, maybe I'll just space it out over the 10 years. I'm going to make it equal. Maybe I'm going to use it for that gap year when I'm not going to be working, or perhaps I'm going to go ahead and retire early and take it over the last few years when I start retirement.
Yeah.
Uh,
And that changes asset allocation, at
yes.
least the ideal asset allocation for that IRA, that beneficiary IRA, right? Because now, because you're forced to start taking income from it, let's say you do the equal installments over 10 years, that's a different portfolio makeup than maybe if you have a time horizon of, well, I'm not going to need to touch this for 10 years, or I only have to take like, 2-3% with maybe the previous stretch IRA rules that were in place, right? So it's changed in that regard. And I think one of the things few people understand is the true sequence risk that is there as soon as you turn on income. And the entire reasoning behind getting more conservative as you get closer to retirement is because you're getting closer to taking income from your portfolio. And once you start taking income from your portfolio, you're replacing your traditional income that you've made your whole life. Uh, Sequence risk is far more paramount. That is the timing of the returns, right? Which is the entire purpose, again, of why people become more conservative with their assets as they age. They don't have the time to make up those bad years. And if those bad years occur earlier on, it can derail a portfolio. So if you have this beneficiary IRA and you have to start taking income from it, it's likely going to be a different asset allocation and worth revisiting than if you shouldn't compare it to your current traditional IRA or current 401k if you have that. Like, you shouldn't look at it and say, well, I think I'll have 80-20 there because I have 80-20 in my 401k. You really do have to approach this differently because there's different income rules for this account.
Absolutely. Yeah. And, if somebody's saying it is based on my risk tolerance, an 80-20 overall portfolio works for me, then we'll say, okay, what about we put that 20% of the fixed income in your inherited IRAs, and then make the other stuff more aggressive. And
Hmm.
that can also be a strategy that works for, as the grown up, the older person that has these accounts, that you're saying, okay, I want to have a balanced portfolio. And so I'm going to put the fixed income, or the, more conservative, maybe income oriented investments in my qualified accounts, for two reasons, right? One is, if you're worried about your kids or whoever it is inheriting this, and you want them to have a tax efficient investment, then having that be a smaller account is going to be helpful. Also, if you are growing that at a smaller pace, that means that your own required minimum distributions are going to be smaller during your lifetime. And then also, you have another option, that if you are the person who currently has these assets, and that you are concerned about your heirs inheriting the assets, doing Roth conversions can be really helpful. So that means you're
Hmm.
moving money out of your IRA and moving it into the Roth. And that could also
Yeah.
help change with that asset location, that you're maybe very conservative in your traditional IRA, and then you move it into the Roth and let it be very growthy and aggressive there, because while there is still that 10-year rule for the Roth to be distributed by your beneficiaries, it's tax free still. So at
Yeah. And you
least the
don't have
tax
the
implications
RMDs
less.
on your side. So on,
Hmm.
before your death, you're not going to be required to start taking money out of that account. So yeah, there's two benefits to that for sure. And
Hmm.
it doesn't affect Social Security taxes, if, depending on where your income is, your Social Security income, which is calculated a little bit differently. Your provisional income is what it's called. It's going to be calculated differently, but Roth distributions don't affect that. And since up to 80% of your Social Security benefit can be taxed, that could be big tax savings if you're in a spot where you potentially don't have income to make your Social Security benefit taxed. Again, Roth is even more beneficial in that regard because it doesn't affect your Social Security taxation, whereas traditional distributions will. Um, so, some other, potential options out there, permanent life insurance has been positioned as an asset that, creates an immediate cash event when you pass away. And that's something that, you could potentially use to pay taxes if you have a, beneficiary IRA. I'm always a little bit hesitant to recommend permanent life insurance, purely for like, tax purposes or accumulation or anything like that. But if it's, built within an estate plan and it's truly positioned for death purposes, like death
Hmm.
planning and just estate planning, there are some benefits there that I think are worth exploring, especially as somebody has kind of worked their way through the hierarchy of money. So they've maybe taken advantage of all the tax accumulation, the tax benefited accumulation methods that are out there, right? They've maxed out retirement options. They have, taken advantage of their spouse's retirement options if they're there, and they don't really have anything else to funnel money to. And they're looking for another asset that might help in the estate planning world. Permanent life insurance is probably something to consider for that person. I wouldn't say it's, up there with like, hey, split your 401k contributions and life insurance contributions to be the same. From an accumulation standpoint, that's a difficult one to argue. I'll leave that up to our consumer to make that judgment call. I would struggle with that personally. But you could position it potentially from an estate planning stance to help pay estate taxes and also help cover things like these beneficiary IRA taxes that would eventually be due. There is nice, definite advantage to having just cash in that estate to help settle the estate, help pay taxes, help the beneficiaries, take care of what they need to take care of. I mean, there is a benefit there. I just don't know, again, how big that benefit needs to be and if it
Right.
has to be life insurance, right?
I agree.
Uh,
And I mean, so what we're trying to solve for is that we're saying, dear Johnny, I'm leaving you with $1 million. And if you distribute it because you make so much money, you're going to have to pay 35% on taxes on that amount. And so I hate that you have to pull it out of your pocket. So here's an extra $350,000 in death benefit to help pay for that. Another way to approach it is just say, "Hey, you're welcome for the $1 million. Now pay the taxes on it,
yeah.
and I'm
Yeah.
not going to
Which
solve
seems
for
to
that."
be it's funny on that. I don't know if you've experienced this, the transition that people go through of, you know, it's almost like the transition of parenthood in a lot of ways, where it's like it's very much like your life is about you and taking care of yourself. And then you have kids, and all of a sudden, like there's a sense of maybe selflessness that enters into the group chat that wasn't maybe there as much before. And very similarly, I've noticed this in the financial planning realm where people are very much building wealth for themselves to get financially independent, as they should.
Mhm.
And then later in life, 70s, let's say 80s, suddenly it's very important to them how that money is distributed to others and really what legacy is left behind. And I don't know if you've experienced that transition, but like I have seen it in a way to where it's more dramatic than I would have guessed. I assume like that is true, but like, when you sit down with people in their 70s and 80s, they are very concerned with, what is being left behind and is everything being taken care of in the way that I want to get taken care of.
Mhm.
And, sometimes life insurance is a part of that. It's just, you can't really qualify for it at those stages of life. And so you kind of have to make that decision earlier on, which is another potential challenge, for positioning it, but something to consider there.
Yeah, no, I agree, and I think leaving a legacy and what kind of legacy you want is a huge part of this whole conversation. And so, if you're thinking, it's not so much that I feel bad that Johnny has to pay all those taxes; it's that I don't want my money, my hard-earned money, to go to the government.
Hmm.
And so, another solve for that could just simply be, well, I want to leave the money to this charity. Qualified money is a great way to do it, right? Because they're not going to pay the taxes on it.
Yeah.
And so if that's
Yeah.
reduced, that they weren't going to, whoever your beneficiary wasn't going to get that money because they were going to need that for taxes, put that to a charity instead. And the net difference, it depends on what the whole situation looks like, but that's another solve
Yeah.
for it as well.
Yeah. Yeah. Donor advised funds potentially for the beneficiary IRA could be an easy route there. But yeah. So anyways, we wanted to give you guys, some things to think about here. Obviously, again, if you're navigating this, there are just natural questions that come up about, how do I take care of my beneficiaries, but not leave them with a mess? And there's an
Hmm.
efficient way to maybe do that. There's not an efficient way, but also if you're on the receiving end of this currently, there's some serious planning that you probably need to consider.
Yeah.
And I would say that involves, again, to reiterate, the asset allocation of that new inherited IRA. That involves the distribution strategy. Since you have a 10-year window, are you going to take it during a gap year? Are you going to stretch it out? Or are you going to take a little bit at a time? And maybe if there's a big year that presents itself, you take more in that year, whatever it might be. We wanted to give you guys some things to consider.
Yeah.
As always, if you're listening on Apple, Spotify, you're listening on YouTube, make sure to subscribe to get more industry insights from industry professionals here at Mariner Wealth Advisors. Again, my name is Michael MacKelvie. Valerie Escobar, thank you for joining us again. You guys take care.
See you later.
Mariner Wealth Advisors, or MWA, is an SEC-registered investment advisor with its principal place of business in the state of Kansas. Registration of an investment advisor does not imply a certain level of skill or training. MWA is in compliance with the current notice filing requirements imposed upon registered investment advisors by those states in which MWA maintains clients. MWA may only transact business in those states in which it is notice filed or qualifies for an exemption or exclusion from notice filing requirements. Any subsequent direct communication by MWA with a prospective client shall be conducted by a representative that is either registered or qualifies for an exemption or exclusion from registration in the state where the prospective client resides. For additional information about MWA, including fees and services, please contact MWA or refer to the Investment Advisor Public Disclosure website at www.advisorinfo.sec.gov. Please read the disclosure statement carefully before you invest or send money. The views expressed in this podcast is for educational purposes only and do not take into account any individual personal, financial, legal, or tax considerations. As such, the information contained herein is not intended to be personal, legal, investment, or tax advice. Nothing herein should be relied upon as such, and there is no guarantee that any claims made will come to pass. The opinions are based on information and sources of information deemed to be reliable, but Mariner Wealth Advisors does not warrant the accuracy of the information. Asset allocation diversification is a strategy designed to manage risk, but it cannot ensure a profit or protect against a loss in a declining market. Investing in securities involves risk of loss, including loss of principal, that clients should be prepared to bear. Strategies or investments discussed may fluctuate in price or value. Past performance is not indicative of future results. Certified Financial Planner, trademark, CFP, registered trademark, and federally registered CFP with flame design marks, collectively the CFP registered marks, are professional certification marks granted in the United States by Certified Financial Planner Board of Standards, Inc., also CFP Board. The CFP registered trademark certification is a voluntary certification. No federal or state law or regulation requires financial planners to hold the CFP certification.